In this video, we will explore the 5 most popular myths about the Apollo 11 mission and debunk them with verifiable facts. Join us on this fascinating journey through history and science as we unravel the truth behind these misconceptions. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more interesting and educational content. Let's get started. Myth 5. The waving flag. One of the most persistent myths about the Apollo 11 moon landing is the idea that the American flag was waving on the moon, which supposedly indicated the presence of wind. On Earth, a flag waves due to the action of the wind. But on the moon, where there is no atmosphere, there should be no wind to make it move. So why does the flag appear to be waving in the images and videos of the moon landing? The answer is quite simple and has to do with the design of the flag. NASA engineers knew that there is no wind on the moon, so they designed a special flag to make it look like it was waving. The flag was made of a stiff material and was held up by a horizontal rod at the top in addition to the vertical pole. This horizontal rod allowed the flag to remain extended and visible, giving it the appearance of waving. Additionally, when astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin planted the flag on the lunar surface, they shook it to ensure it was firmly planted. This movement caused the flag to move, and due to the lack of air resistance on the moon, it continued to oscillate for a while before coming to a stop. In summary, the flag was not waving due to the presence of wind, but thanks to its design and the initial movement given by the astronauts. This myth is a clear example of how appearances can be deceiving and how intelligent engineering can create surprising visual effects. Myth 4. The inconsistent shadows. One of the most persistent myths about the Apollo 11 mission is the idea that the shadows in the photos are not parallel, supposedly indicating the use of multiple light sources in a film studio. Skeptics argue that if the sun were the only light source, all shadows should be parallel. However, upon observing the mission's images, one can see that the shadows sometimes appear to diverge or converge, leading some to question the authenticity of the photos. To debunk this myth, it is crucial to understand how shadows behave on uneven terrain. The surface of the moon is not flat. It is filled with craters, rocks, and uneven ground. When sunlight hits this rugged terrain, the shadows can become distorted and appear inconsistent. This phenomenon is similar to what happens on Earth when sunlight casts shadows over a mountainous or bumpy landscape. Additionally, perspective plays an important role. Shadows that seem not to be parallel in a photo can be due to the position of the camera and the angle from which the image was taken. In a three-dimensional terrain, shadows may appear to deviate from their parallel course due to perspective and the topography of the location. In summary, the inconsistent shadows in the Apollo 11 photos are not evidence of a setup with multiple light sources. They are the natural result of the interaction of sunlight with the moon's uneven terrain and the effects of perspective. This myth, like many others, falls apart when considering the science and logic behind the images. Myth 3. There are no stars in the photos. One of the most persistent myths about the Apollo 11 moon landing is the absence of stars in the photos taken on the moon. Skeptics argue that the lack of stars is proof that the images were taken in a film studio, not on the lunar surface. However, this claim has no basis when one understands how cameras and photography work in general. The cameras used by the Apollo 11 astronauts were specifically configured to capture the lunar surface, which is extremely bright due to the reflection of sunlight. To obtain clear and detailed images of the lunar landscape and the astronauts, the cameras had to use a short exposure setting and a small aperture. This means that the amount of light entering the camera is limited, allowing for the capture of details in a very bright environment without overexposing the image. Stars, on the other hand, are much less bright compared to the lunar surface. To photograph stars, a much longer exposure and a larger aperture would be needed to allow enough starlight to reach the camera sensor. If the cameras had been configured to capture the stars, the photos of the lunar surface would have come out completely overexposed, appearing as white smudges without details. In summary, the absence of stars in the Apollo 11 photos is not evidence of a hoax. It is simply a consequence of the necessary settings to capture clear and detailed images of the lunar surface. The cameras were adjusted to photograph the bright landscape of the moon, not the starry sky. So, the next time someone mentions this myth, you now know the scientific explanation behind why stars are not visible in the Apollo 11 photos. Myth 2. The deadly radiation of the Van Allen belt. One of the most persistent myths about the Apollo 11 mission is that the astronauts could not have survived passing through the Van Allen radiation belt. This belt, composed of charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field, indeed poses a challenge for any space mission. However, NASA took careful measures to ensure the astronauts' safety. First, it is important to understand that the Van Allen belt is not an impenetrable barrier of deadly radiation. The radiation in these belts varies in intensity and is concentrated in certain regions. NASA designed the Apollo 11 trajectory to pass through the less dense parts of the belt, significantly reducing radiation exposure. Additionally, the exposure time was a crucial factor. The Apollo 11 spacecraft passed through the Van Allen belt at high speed, which limited the time the astronauts were exposed to the radiation. In total, the exposure was approximately an hour and a half, resulting in a radiation dose much lower than what would be considered dangerous. Lastly, the Apollo 11 command module was equipped with adequate shielding to protect the astronauts from radiation. This shielding, along with the careful planning of the trajectory and exposure time, ensured that the radiation levels the astronauts were exposed to were comparable to those of a medical X-ray. In summary, although the Van Allen belt poses a challenge, NASA implemented a series of effective measures to minimize the risks and ensure the safety of the Apollo 11 astronauts. Thus, this myth is debunked. The radiation of the Van Allen belt was not an insurmountable obstacle for the historic lunar mission. Myth 1. The moon landing was staged. One of the most persistent and famous myths about Apollo 11 is the belief that the moon landing was staged in a Hollywood studio. However, this conspiracy theory has been debunked numerous times by an overwhelming amount of evidence and testimonies. First, let's consider the photographic and video evidence. The images and recordings of the moon landing have been analyzed by photography and film experts, who have confirmed that there are no signs of manipulation or forgery. Additionally, the lighting conditions and shadows in the photos are consistent with what would be expected on the lunar surface, something that would be extremely difficult to replicate in a studio of that era. Secondly, there are the lunar rock samples. During the Apollo 11 mission, the astronauts brought back approximately 21.5 kilograms of lunar rocks and dust. These samples have been studied by scientists around the world, who have confirmed that their composition is unique and unlike anything found on Earth. The authenticity of these rocks is compelling evidence that the astronauts were indeed on the moon. Moreover, the Apollo 11 mission was followed in real time by thousands of amateur radio operators and observatories around the world. These enthusiasts were able to track the lunar module's radio signal and confirm its origin from the moon. The coordination required to deceive so many independent observers would be virtually impossible. It is also important to mention the testimonies of the astronauts themselves and NASA personnel. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, along with thousands of engineers, scientists, and technicians, worked tirelessly to make this mission possible. The number of people involved and the complexity of the project make a cover-up of such magnitude highly improbable. Finally, subsequent missions to Apollo 11, such as Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17, also landed on the moon and brought back more evidence and data that corroborate the achievements of the original mission. Each of these missions added more evidence that the moon landings were real and not staged. In summary, the idea that the Apollo 11 moon landing was staged is unfounded when considering all the available evidence. The images, lunar rocks, testimonies, and independent observations irrefutably confirm that man indeed reached the moon in 1969. In summary, we have debunked 5 of the most persistent myths about the Apollo 11 mission, from the alleged moon landing hoax to conspiracy theories about the waving flag and inconsistent shadows. The Apollo 11 mission was not only a monumental achievement in the history of space exploration, but also demonstrated the human capacity to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Let us always remember the importance of relying on facts and scientific evidence. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue learning more about space exploration, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.